Welcome, Croiso, to the session 2 of our podcast. And I am sitting in the beautiful landscape of Cornwall on a family holiday. I had everything ready to do a wonderful podcast yesterday, and when I listened back, unfortunately, it all crackled because the Wi Fi here is out of this world, literally. So I needed to re-record this, and I was listening back to the podcast and it sounded fantastic. So I don't know if I can keep up with that today, but we'll see what comes. My name is B. Halligan. I am a priestess of Avalon, a priestess of Caradwen, and a priestess of the inner temples, a priestess of the dark sisterhood. And my little ramblings are often about real life priestessing here in the world at this moment of time. I've been a public priestess for 10 years, and in Avalon, where people come from all over the world, I worked with the Goddess Temple for 10 years, and now we are big enough to maybe step out on our own. And we have a little temple in the centre of Glastonbury that is just ours, and we love it. If you'd like to hear more about what I talk about, please click like and subscribe and hang out with me once a week. This time I would like to talk a little bit about ceremonies, because ceremonies are so important in our life. And people sometimes ask me, does one really need a priestess to conduct a ceremony? Well, that depends on what kind of ceremony it is. If you are doing a hand fasting, you could do the hand fasting by yourself. You could speak the words to each other, but it is always good to have somebody there, because on the day you might get quite nervous, you might get quite distracted, things may not work out, your nerves might get the better of you. It's nice to have a guiding hand there, but it is not necessary for any kind of ceremony to have a priestess around. One of the ceremonies that we are particularly known for in the Caradwen crew, in the Caradwen kin, as we call ourselves, however, is a fertility ceremony. And for that, you do need the magic of the priestesses. Now, I want to make really clear, it is mainly the Caradwen priestesses that talk about magic, that talk about spellcraft, because Caradwen is the goddess of the witches. The whole story, the whole myth of Caradwen is about how she creates a magic brew, how she rides to Dinas Avalon, the city of the pharaohs where the Fericht live, and they have their big fort, a big, castle there, and in the castle there is this enormous library. And for the spell that Caradwen wants to do, she needs to compel. What I mean by that is, in the whole, spellcrafters, especially women, use their connection with nature to create spells. But when it comes to things that are a little bit more compelling, where we are asking something to be done, it is sometimes necessary to have the tools and the knowledge and the spellcraft of the Gwydon, of the high magicians. So it's more of a magic. You may want to see it as a difference between spellcrafting, which is working with the natural world to make something happen, and high magic, or magic, as Gerald Gardner used to call it. So she rides up there, the doors open, and that in itself is magic, because the Fericht are the highest druids of the Celtic people. They are highly trained and very connected with the deities, and they don't just let anyone in. So for them to allow Caradwen to ride through as if the place belongs to her is already a little bit of a giveaway of how much power she really has. And she goes and she consults one of the books. Now, I sometimes wonder whether they were the great libraries of the Druids. We know that there was a great library in Alexandria which got burnt down. There seems to have been a place to congregate all of the knowledge, because our present historians tell us that the Druids couldn't write, or they didn't write anything down. We know that they are very clever businessmen, and those businessmen would be communicating in writing in Greek, but also there have been pieces of writing like the Calendar of Coligny in the Celtic language. So we don't know, and this is the thing that so many people don't tell you. We don't know for sure. We really don't know anything apart from what, in those days, Julius Caesar and his merry men told us about the Celts. So there's Caradwyn sitting in this library, writing down or memorizing the spell that she needs in order to help her son. And then she conducts not a ceremony but a ritual. And that's a difference that I would like to discuss with you, perhaps a little bit later. But there has to be someone. It's a bit like an orchestra. Of course they could all play by themselves, but it has to be somebody who actually weaves all of the different parts of a ceremony together. And that is what the priestess does. And the ceremonies that we have, that are magical ceremonies, they have very specific timings. They have very specific steps that follow each other in order to everything to be perfect and happen in the right place at the right time. And for that, you need a priestess. You need somebody who knows what they're doing. So, for example, a fertility spell or fertility work, as we call it, ceremony, has several priestesses and healing priestesses, and they have perhaps members of the family present. And if you have people who are not magical present at a magical event, it can be quite difficult to have them understand what you're trying to do, especially people who are not necessarily in the pagan path. But I will say that so many of our ceremonies have been successful. So many of our ceremonies have been, in the end, they have been part of creating a new life. We have had over 20 babies that were never supposed to be in the world, where the doctors have said, I'm sorry, but you will never have a child. And we're very proud of that. It doesn't mean that we can help everybody. And what happens is that the priestess that is approached will look into the future. Yeah, so there are different ways that we work with. And if we don't see a little soul or a soul that wishes to descend into the body of this person, of this woman, then we would never make a promise that we can help. We would say, I'm sorry, we don't see a soul at this moment that wishes to descend, and we are asking any soul that would like to come and be your child to come forward and talk to us, and then if that happens, we can do the ceremony. That is very hard at times as a priestess to say, we cannot help, we can't do this. I personally won't conduct hand fastings when I can see that the two souls of the people before me do not actually match, that they're not actually in unison. Sometimes people can be so misguided. I mean, you see the amount of divorces, the amount of times that people think that they're perfect for each other and then they're not. And so I won't conduct a ceremony, a sacred ceremony for someone who is probably not going to be in the right frame, in the right frequency with the other person. There are 100 reasons why people want to get hand fasted, and for the longest time, before we had civil arrangements by the government where you didn't have to get married, you just had a civil partnership, a lot of the men, especially those who weren't really pagan, they thought a hand fasting was a cop-out. They thought that in hand fasting it's just, it's not legally binding, so it's a cop-out, you don't have to worry about it. It's just something we go through. Well, for those of us who are believers who are priestesses, priests, who do hand fastings, we know that we're binding two souls together. And I would never bind two souls together where not both souls are in perfect agreement that this is something that they wish to do. The other thing that I won't do, and I'm often asked for that, and especially by men who are trying to be controlling, the narcissistic men who wish to bind someone to themselves. Our hand fasting is as long as love shall last, for a year and a day, for this lifetime. And then some people ask me for all lives forward. I would never ever do that. My go-to is for as long as love shall last. That way, you know that when one of them is not ready to be in perfect unison with the person that they're handfasted to, the bind automatically, magically dissolves, even if the other person is still attached. What I see a lot of, and what people don't realize, is that when you do a wedding ceremony in front of, whether it is somebody in the town hall or somebody in a hotel, any kind of promise, any kind of ceremony that is sacred in any way, including the legal ones, you are binding two souls together. So what I often see is when something has happened and this bond has been dissolved or has been divorced, what I often find is that the people are still attached to each other by soul bonding. And it actually takes a trained soul midwife, a trained priestess or priest to unbind that soul from each other, because otherwise you drag in this old partnership with you wherever you go in a new partnership, and that actually often also appears in the mundane world. So whatever attachments you have in the soul realm, you also keep in the mundane world. Hence you have so many people talking about difficult ex-wives, difficult ex-husbands, problem with the children, the fact that they still can't talk to each other in a way that, is kind and loving, forgiving each other for some of the trespasses that have happened, and actually wishing each other a happy life. You still feel a lot of the bitterness, and that is because two souls are still bonded together and they're straining apart and they don't want to be together. So for me, I don't ever understand that in a sacred ceremony of bonding the soul, there is not an understanding that when the time comes, the heart will detach itself, but the soul is still bonded, and that needs a professional to unbind that, to take that bond and dissolve it. You can't cut cords. When you cut cords, there is always a repercussion. I have so many people in Glastonbury that offer cord cutting, and they have absolutely no idea what they're doing, how much harm they're causing. And maybe eventually I will talk a little bit more about that in a different podcast. But for me, there is this this gentleness, this loving, taking away that bond and giving each other gratitude for the time together and the lessons that have been learned and the good times and the children sometimes that come from that bond. And once you've done that well, and I did it the first time 40 years ago when my first husband and I split up, I was determined that we were going to be friends for the children's sake. And although I had no experience really of paganism or anything like that, it was very clear to me that if I wanted to have a good relationship with him, I had to, reverse whatever had been done to us when we held hand, exchanged rings, and promised each other fidelity. And it was that from which was born the idea of different ceremonies that can help people be at peace with each other. And sometimes that is something that is not quite right in the world, and it causes a lot of harm in the world. Business partnerships that fall foul, for example. I know it sounds weird that I would say you could do a ceremony for that. You could, if you were to dissolve a partnership, any partnership, you could do a ceremony for that, and everybody would walk away released. Ceremony is not just a celebration. A ceremony is something that has meaning. As it has meaning. Look at the ceremonies that we have to celebrate the birthday of someone. It's important, no matter who you are, to celebrate our birthdays. And very often when people are all alone and they have no one to celebrate their birthday, the pain and suffering that causes. This is the one day where they are in a celebration, in a ceremony of, and what is a ceremony? You have cake, you have, I don't know, coffee and drinks. You celebrate the day of somebody's birth with ceremony in one way or the other. Very often people in the modern world don't quite understand how many ceremonial doings they actually follow without knowing that it is a ceremony. And so for me, I do believe that there are times and places where ceremony is very much needed. Another one is perhaps a funeral ceremony. Of course, you can have a collaborative funeral. I love those things, they're really great. But again, you will make it something, a memorial ceremony. A lot of people now, because of the way that crematoria work, and you only get 30 minutes, and it's only really some people that get to speak and say goodbye to the person in as such, and it's such a dreary place, no matter how hard they try. So nowadays what happens is that the body is taken away from wherever it died, it's cremated, and then afterwards, not directly afterwards, but when the time is right, then people get together and celebrate the person's life with ceremony. People speak, people tell each other how much they loved the person. Often they have sort of like a video running of the person in good times. And David Bowie was actually one of the first celebrities who brought that forward, and it has become now quite a trendy thing to do. And what I actually find as a death priestess, as a soul midwife, is that the funeral is often the most dreaded thing and the thing that causes the most upset between families, because even if the person has left an ACP, an advanced care plan, there is still the feelings of the people who are left behind to consider. And very often, if the person hasn't made their wishes known prior to their death, very often when somebody comes, an estranged brother or whatever, and then the discussions start, and all the bitterness comes out. If you do without any of that, and then you sit together, and this is what a priestess can do too, is sit together with people, and even though they won't conduct a ceremony as such, they can give advice on what beautiful things people can do, the lighting of a tea light heart, for example, wherever they are, an outdoor ceremony perhaps. Some people have celebrated the life of someone in ceremony, and then afterwards they've had a barbecue. It's all about that, So I have had ceremonies where people have gone into a natural burial ground. They've actually dug the grave. The men have dug the grave, and then the person is laid to rest in ceremonial ways. And then once the grave has been covered again, people go and have a party, they have a celebration. It's almost like the person is still there with them, and they usually are in spirit. The soul usually is there as well. Priestesses can do so much more than people understand. Very often, when I'm in the temple, in the goddess temple, or in our Keratwin temple, people come in and they just want to talk. And one of our, most trained in parts of being a priestess is sacred listening. It's actually being someone who sits and just listens and holds sacred space for someone. And there is a difference, having been a therapist for several years now, there is a difference sitting in a room that is quite, dreary, and following the guidelines of an organization that doesn't necessarily understand how people feel these days, is all about safeguarding and whether somebody can sue you, to coming into a beautifully decorated sacred space. As soon as you step foot into either the goddess temple or the temple of Caradwyn in Avalon, you can feel the sacredness that you are entering. The candles are lit, the music is playing, and you can just sit down, have a cup of tea, and then you can just talk. And we very often say to the people, we are holding space for you. It is almost like a ceremony. We're ceremonialists who are holding space for you. And people talk, and everything that is said is totally and utterly confidential. And what happens is that we don't give advice. We don't signpost. We don't do anything but listen. And when people say to us, well, what do you think, this situation? I could say to them, well, let's have a look at the cards. And no, we don't charge for that. Let's have a look at the cards. What did the cards tell you? And that actually helps people. Now, if I was doing my straight counseling, I could never say, let's go to the cards, or let's have a look at the crystal ball, or let's see what the flames tell us. Because people would, it's just not done. It's just not done. And yet it is so helpful to people. They actually feel that the cards can guide them. The light of the candle actually illuminates the pictures that are already in their own mind. So that in itself can be a ceremony, can be a place of peace. And what I love is when people leave the temple feeling that they have a way forward, that there is a solution, that they have had the care that they need. And that for me, as a priestess, is a ceremonialist work. I would like to thank you for listening, because, it is always a great joy to talk to you about what I'm passionate about. And I saw that we had 107 listeners, and I felt that, in a way, we talk to people, they hear us, and it's a thing of beauty. So if you're wondering what the picture is about that I have got on the slide, the picture is me as a sun lover goddess ceremonialist with the Glastonbury Goddess Conference. That was my 3rd year as a priestess, as a ceremonialist, and there as a ceremonialist you serve a whole year. You are in meetings for full days, you are celebrating, you're creating vast ceremonies for hundreds of people, and this was one of mine. And I will say the shock of my life was when I was asked to emulate the priestesses of the old sun temples and go topless. When you're a certain age, like I am, and you feel somebody asks you to go topless, for me that would be a no. That will be a complete no. But when you are in a group of 9 sacred ceremonialists, and this is what has been decided, because it is the call of the goddess to do so, I'm afraid all bets are off. And we were holding people as we were embodying goddess, and it was one of the highlights of my life to be a ceremonialist, to have people come to me, to listen to the words of the goddess through me. And it is something that will be in my mind for the rest of my life. And so I wish you a wonderful week, and I shall speak to you again next week. Look forward to it, and please click like and subscribe, and blessed be. Blessed be.